Hey YouTube fam, it is your girl Sophia, and I am so happy that you decided to come back and check out today's video. Today we are going to be talking about our chemo and transplant journey. If you are new here, my name is Sophia Desmornes. I am a wife, a mom of 4 handsome boys, and I am the author of I Know Who I Am children's book. There is a link in the description box if you would like to learn more about it. Once again, please like and subscribe so that way you can come along this journey where we are talking about complex medical issues with our kids, self-esteem building, and empowering parents during difficult times with their children. So where we left off with we are about to enter the hospital because the time has come. So we go into the hospital and it is myself, my husband, and our second child. And we actually spend the whole day. It was really hard because he had to be NPO. And what that means is you can have nothing by mouth because he needed to have a surgical procedure to put a CVL line into his chest. So if you're not medical, like you have no medical background, what that basically means is he was going to be in the hospital for a really long time. And sometimes when you go into the hospital, you might need an IV either in your hand, you might get it in your brachial area, but usually it's a peripheral IV. And if you're not in the hospital long, you only use it for a few days and then it gets taken out. If they usually change it every 3 days, but when you're having a chemo for an extended period of time and you're going to be needing fluids and all these things, it's important that a port be put in. So he had his port placed right in his chest. And so he needed to have that surgical procedure done the day that we went into the hospital. So that was tough because imagine he's 2 and this procedure didn't happen until sort of late morning, early afternoon. And so we're just waiting for the procedure to happen and then for us to go over to the room that he was assigned. So when we get there, we realized that his room was 608. And I was like, okay, God, I know that you are right here in this because the number 8 represents new beginnings. So we go in, and of course, as I said, I pray in the room and I'm like, Lord, let your will be done. We come against all complications. We're about to do this. So at that time, COVID wasn't a thing. So we were able to have family come and visit, and we were juggling basically having a 2-year-old in the hospital and also managing a 4-year-old. And we made the decision that we were going to pull out our oldest from preschool, daycare, just because the amount of germs that kids have and is collected would not be beneficial if he was going to be coming in and out of the hospital to spend time with his brother. So what we did is we switched off. I would stay with our second for a day, spend the night, and then the next day, we would switch off. But our lives were basically eat, sleep, breathe, hospital. That's what it was. And whoever stayed at home would come with our oldest, spend the whole day, and then we'd switch off. And that's what it was. And so when we got into the hospital, as I said, CVL line has been placed. We then began the process of chemo. So he was on 2 different chemos, fludarabine and busulfan. And one of them was 4 times a day. The other one was once. And it was just going in through the line. And one thing that I think people don't realize is that, and I for myself, I didn't realize that you can get the chemo, but the effects of the chemo do not start right when you get it. It actually takes a little bit of time. So we start our countdown as negative days. So we come into the hospital and then the day that chemo begins is -7, then -6, -5, -4, depending on how long the chemo treatment is. And then you get to day 0, and then it's whoop whoop transplant day. And so for us, transplant day came, and it was exciting but also very nerve-wracking, because one parent is with our second, and then the other parent, which was me at that time, was coming into the hospital at like 6 o'clock in the morning to be able to prepare our oldest for the transplant. And so when you have a stem cell transplant, when they collect the stem cells, it's called a harvest. So they're taking harvest from our oldest to be able to then infuse it into our second. And that's why you need to have the chemo to be able to break down your current immune system to be able to receive a new one. And with the breaking down of your immune system to be able to receive the new one, the hope is that your body will not reject it and realize, hey, these aren't my cells, this is foreign, and then have your body start to attack it. And that's actually called graft versus host disease. So for our transplant day, which is a big day, you have a banner on your door and it says Happy Transplant Day. And we decided to dress the boys up as superheroes because that's what they were, superheroes. Our oldest was a superhero for being able to save his younger brother, and our 2-year-old was a superhero because here he is combating these things that we have never faced. I had never slept in a hospital before unless it was to give birth. My husband didn't have any, medical issues. So here we have 2 superheroes that are just teaching us about life, teaching us about resiliency, teaching us about the importance of health. But when you come together, that love is so important in the midst of all of these challenges. So, we had the balloons, they were sitting in a wheelchair together, and they're on their tablets, and they genuinely had no idea what was going on, but it was very, very, very exciting. And the infusion took about 3.5, almost 4 hours. And our oldest was a champ, an absolute champ. When he, finished the process of getting the harvest, people were amazed. Like, didn't you just donate harvest? How are you moving around? But kids, once again, are so resilient. And so from that point on, with our day 0, which was transplant day, moving forward, it gets worse before it gets better. I will say that, because after transplant happened, the effects of chemo started to kick in, which was the hair loss. Even though we had cut his hair, the little hair follicles, the little tiny hair that he did have on the pillowcase, you could see that it was starting to fall off. The busulfan chemo caused his skin color to change. He started to get very, very dark. He started to get mucositis, which is inflammation in your mouth and in your throat, which made it difficult for him to be able to swallow, which made it difficult for him to be able to speak. His voice sounded very, very, very raspy. And at one point, he did stop eating. There was no eating. And we had gone back and forth on what is the next step in regards to that. Should he get an NG tube, which is a tube that would go into his nose to be able to provide him with nutrients, or would he get TPN, which then would just go through the IV? And we ended up going with TPN because he ended up having a massive nosebleed before we even got to do the NG tube. And it was just blood and blood and blood. And the nurses were like, they had never seen anything like that before. So we ended up going with the TPN. And what I learned was that as you're waiting for engraftment, which means that your body shows that it is recognizing the new cells and it's actually starting to work, you get the high fevers. Like I said, you get the mucositis. And as active as your child was at one point, the body has sort of slowed down and is dealing with this painful, very painful process. But then there's hope on the other side, because as you're waiting and everything starts to decline, slowly but surely you start to see a rise. Slowly and surely you start to see a rise. And the goal of engraftment is you want your neutrophil count to be 500 or higher. And I remember that it was Mother's Day weekend, and it started off with like, okay, your neutrophils are like 100 and something. And then we got to 217. I'll never forget that number. And then we went from like 217 to like 271. And then from 271, it jumped to 500. And I was like, thank you, Lord. Oh my gosh, you have engrafted. And now we can start to plan for what life is going to look like outside of the hospital.